Hello, everyone. My name is Zachary Strong. I'm an engineering physics graduate, a biblical scholar, an author, and a musician. And today we're going to be looking at the mathematics of divine reward and biblical humility. So, what I'm going to do in this video is walk you through some Kabbalistic concepts and some Kabbalistic writings. And I'm going to show you roughly how the mathematics of these concepts work out. So, if you are a Bible person, you probably know that the laws of physics and mathematics and so on were created by God. But it seems to me like a lot of people haven't necessarily thought about the mathematical way that God governs the universe. And it turns out that mathematics and mathematical concepts can be extended to spirituality and Kabbalah. So that's what I'm going to be exploring in this video. We're going to be looking at the purpose of creation as outlined in a book named Derek Hashem, The Way of God. We're going to be asking ourselves the question, why isn't heaven free? Why do we have to earn heaven? Okay, we're then going to be looking at the path to divine reward. And finally, we'll be looking at the value of biblical humility, and specifically the mathematical value of biblical humility. So, I guess let's just jump right into it with the purpose of creation. So, I've discussed this in some of my other videos, but there's a concept in Kabbalah known as the Or Ein Sof, which translates to light without end, or infinite light. That's one way to describe God in his purest form. Now, the Or Ein Sof is overpowering, okay? And in order to have our finite material world, God had to contract parts of himself, which is known as Tzimtzum, and hide his own light, which gives us the conditions of free will. Okay, so you can kind of think of it as like an ocean with a sandbar in the middle, okay, where the water is shallower, okay? That's kind of our world. And then outside of our world is the Or Ein Sof, which is the really deep ocean. Okay? Now, within this world, every soul is a spark of the divine, which is on a journey to discover and embody divinity. And then through our free will decisions, we gain merit that we will enjoy in what some people call heaven, other people call Olam Haba, or the world to come. Okay, so basically we're here to make free will decisions, follow commandments, do good deeds, refine ourselves, and then gain reward later. Now, if we dive into a book known as Derek Hashem, or The Way of God, this is how one of the Jewish sages puts it. The purpose of creation was for God to give from his goodness to another besides him. And behold, see that his goodness alone is true perfection, devoid of all deficiencies, and there is no other perfection like it at all. However, his wisdom decreed that in that this good is perfect, it is fitting that the one who benefits it own that good, meaning one that acquires the good themselves and not one that has the good joined to them in a contingent way. Therefore he decreed and arranged that the matters of perfection and the matters of deficiency be created, and a creature be created that would have the equal possibility of both of these matters, or free will, and that mechanisms be given to this creature through which it could acquire the perfections for itself and remove the deficiencies from itself. And then it would happen that it would become similar to its creator in that which is possible for it. Okay, so what the Ramchal is saying here is that God, the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light, wants to share of that light with another being, okay, which is us, okay? However, in order for us to acquire that light, okay, in order for us to acquire that light, we need to make free will decisions to acquire that light for ourselves. So it's something that we have, okay? And what he's saying is that, yes, God could just give us the Or Ein Sof without us doing anything. That's possible, okay? But for some reason, God decided that we were to be put in a world, given free will, and we have to earn this light for ourselves. Okay? And to be honest, this is considered a mystery by many people. Like, why is it that God wanted us to earn this light for ourselves? Right? Like, what is going on here? Why can't we all just be created in heaven and enjoy heaven? Like, why do we have to go through the trials and tribulations of this world? Right? Like, what exactly is going on here? Okay, and so that brings us to the question of, why isn't heaven free? So on Chabad.org, they talk about a concept known as the bread of shame. And this is what it has to say. Why should the Creator, who is the essence of all goodness, require work and service as humankind's only ultimate path to perfection? Why must we struggle and toil to remove the many obstacles and barriers to realizing our true potential? Does this not seem to be the very opposite of God's infinite goodness? A deeper analysis of human nature, however, reveals that requiring work, toil, and effort was an act of ultimate and perfect goodness. When a person invests effort, they earn their reward, even when they have not exerted great effort, but have merely pleased someone else. The other might be moved to give him a gift. But in a case when even this factor of pleasing another is absent, okay, this is called bread of shame, which does not satisfy but distresses. Okay, so for example, let's say you're walking down the street and someone comes up to you with a briefcase with $1 million in it. And they just say, hey, here's $1 million, right? You might take the money, right? But it's going to feel weird. It's going to feel weird. It's like, why did I earn, like, I didn't do anything to earn this money. Why is someone random just giving me $1 million, right? A lot of people would be suspicious. They'd be like, okay, this is too good to be true. This is some kind of prank, or maybe this money is stolen or something. I don't know, right? It doesn't make sense why I'm getting this $1 million. And that's kind of what they're describing with this bread of shame concept. Okay, so if you were a soul and you were just created and put in heaven and given access to the Or Ein Sof, and you didn't have to do anything for it, it would feel weird. It would feel weird. Okay? Now we have to ask, right? Why? Why couldn't God just make things so that it wouldn't feel weird? Okay? And that's a valid question. It's, to be honest, it's a bit of a mystery. However, I'm an engineering graduate, and I like to think about things mathematically. And when I apply some mathematics to these concepts, this is what I come up with. Okay? So the Or Ein Sof is basically super infinity. And your soul, you could call it a small infinity. Okay? And so mathematically, if we place a small infinity next to a super infinity, it would feel like zero by comparison. Okay, the smaller infinity, or even the finite object, would be nullified next to the super infinity, or the Or Ein Sof. Okay, therefore, in order to prevent this nullification, God can only give people the fraction of divine light that they earn for themselves. Okay, otherwise it would completely nullify the soul. Okay, one analogy that I would have is, like, if you imagine a balloon, okay, like imagine a balloon. Imagine blowing the balloon up so much that it explodes. Okay, that's kind of what's happening here, or kind of what would happen. Okay, if God were to just create souls and put them in heaven and fill them with the Or Ein Sof, the souls would basically explode, right? Like, they are finite and small compared to the infinite light. And so if they're just, given super infinity, they would explode and become as nothing. Okay, it's just kind of a mathematical reality. Okay, and so therefore, what God decided was that, okay, I'm going to make a world, okay, going to give these souls free will, and I'm going to give them challenges and pressures and so on. And if they choose the good, if they choose godliness while under this pressure, they're going to earn that light for themselves. And so I'll be able to give them as much light as they earn, and they won't feel nullified because they will know that they have earned this for themselves. It's not going to feel weird. Okay, it's not going to feel weird. It's going to be okay. Okay, it's the difference between randomly getting $1 million on the street or working hard and making that $1 million for yourself. Okay, making the $1 million for yourself feels a lot better. Okay, now the cool thing is that the way this is structured gives us an added benefit, which is the satisfaction of working and earning. Okay, so if God were to just make souls in heaven and fill them with the Or Ein Sof, not only would it nullify and explode the soul, okay, but it wouldn't feel like it was earning anything. There wouldn't be any satisfaction. But the way things are set up, any light that people earn for themselves in heaven and so on comes with the additional satisfaction that they lived a good life, overcame challenges, chose the good while under pressure, and so on. Okay? So that explains why heaven isn't free. Okay? And mathematically, it makes sense. Mathematically, it makes sense. Because if you have a super infinity and you try to jam that super infinity into a smaller vessel, like a soul, it would explode the soul. And so we have to have things set up in a way where we earn as much of the light as we can for ourselves. Now, this brings me to a brief discussion of the path towards reward. Okay, so the Ramchal also wrote a book called Path of the Just, and this is what he has to say. Behold, what our sages have taught us is that man was created solely to delight in God and to derive pleasure in the radiance of the divine presence. For this is the true delight and the greatest pleasure that can possibly exist. The place of this pleasure is, in truth, in the world to come. The means that lead a person to this goal are the commandments which the blessed God commanded to us. The place of the performance of these commandments is only in this world. Therefore, man was first placed in this world so that through these means prepared for him here, he will be able to reach the place prepared for him, namely the world to come. Okay, so what the Ramchal is basically saying is that the commandments that God gave through the Torah, okay, the commandments, are the ways that we achieve light for ourselves. Okay, so, for non-Jews, for example, refraining from stealing, doing things like praying, studying the Torah, improving your character traits, and so on, these are all ways that you refine yourself and gain access to the parts of the Or Ein Sof that you can earn. Okay? Now, when it comes to character traits, I figured I would just share a few books that would help with that. Path of the Just by the Ramchal is really good for character traits. Pirkei Avot, known as Ethics of the Fathers, and Shar Habitachon, which is Gate of Trust. Okay, so these are 3 books that will help with character traits. And then when it comes to the commandments, you can go to the Torah for that. You can go to the Divine Code for Noahides and so on. But when it comes to character traits, those are just a few books that could be useful. Now, among the character traits is something known as humility. Okay, and there's some mathematics here as well when it comes to biblical humility. Now, in the Torah world, humility is known as bitul, or self-nullification. So bitul hayesh is the nullification of creation to the Creator, to the extent of transforming one's personal will to be aligned with Hashem's will, in a way that the one nullifying has no will of their own. An example of this is the Father's bitul to Hashem, where the essence of this nullification is like a chariot to its rider, where it's clearly visible that the chariot has no personal opinion and is completely subordinate to the rider's will. Similarly, Abraham said about himself, I am dust and ashes, indicating Bitul Hayesh. So this seems like a bit of a paradox, okay? Because on one hand, we want to be ourselves, right? Like we are souls, okay? Everyone has a soul, and there's unique aspects about their soul. Everyone has their own purpose in life and so on, okay? And so the presence of an ego is difficult to get around. Okay, like you can't just walk around saying, I am nothing, and truly believe it. Okay, because we know that, like, we are something. Okay, but the concept of Bitul Hiyesh is basically nullifying your will and only doing God's will. Okay, when it comes to the commandments and character traits and, your life and so on. Basically, you want to like basically nullify yourself and just fulfill the will of God, whatever that might be for your life. Okay, and there again, there's a bit of a paradox here, right? Because in the previous sections of this video, I was talking about the problem of a soul being exploded by divine light, right? So nullification, like true nullification of the soul, is not what we're after. What we're after is nullification of a personal will that does not align with the divine will. Okay, if that makes sense. So if you're sinning, or you're doing bad, or you've got negative character traits that you don't want to work on and so on, right? That's not quite God's will. God, even though everyone is unique and has a unique purpose, God has a certain will for how that person is to achieve that purpose. Okay, so basically aligning your will with God's will is what we're after. And it turns out that, as far as I can fathom, there's some mathematics here as well. So if you look at the function of 1 over x, okay, what you find is that as x increases, the function decreases. Okay, like 1 over 10 is 0.1. 1 over 5 is, larger. Okay, 1 over 0.5, 1 over 5 is 0.2, right? So as x gets larger, the function decreases, and as x approaches 0, the function approaches infinity. Okay, so if we think about this in terms of divine light, okay, mathematically it kind of works out where the light that you can receive for your soul is the numerator, and then your ego is the denominator. And it works very similarly to a 1 over x function. The larger your ego is, the less divine light you can receive. The smaller your ego is, the more divine light that you can receive. And, if God follows this function, and his creation follows this function, as your ego approaches 0, the amount of divine light that you can receive approaches a kind of infinity. Okay, and when it comes to people like Moses or Abraham, one of the reasons that they're so great and so spiritually elevated is because they didn't really have necessarily an ego of their own. Okay, Moses was said to be one of the most humble people on the face of the planet. And Abraham, also very humble. Okay, they just wanted to do God's will. They didn't have much of an ego of their own. Okay, so as the ego approaches 0, the amount of divine light that you can receive increases. Now, one final thing I'll mention is a connection to something I've talked about in another video, which is divine punishments, okay? So bad things that happen to you. What's going on there? Okay? So basically, the more surprising something is, the more information it carries. So when things are going good, okay, when things are going well, you're not really that surprised necessarily. You know, things are just going well, you're doing what you want. But when you get a correction from heaven or a punishment from heaven, that contains a lot of information and it allows you to reflect and improve upon yourself and so on. Okay? And this is related to ego because someone with a big ego is not going to be able to take accountability. Okay, someone with a big ego is not able to take accountability, and therefore they won't be able to necessarily access the information that's been offered to them in the form of a divine punishment or a divine rebuke. Okay, and so this ties into, you know, the equation that I outlined here, which is the amount of divine light that someone can receive is, you know, basically with their ego in the denominator. The larger the ego, the less light you can receive. So when it comes to things like divine punishments or mishaps in life or whatever, which we call concealed blessings, the smaller your ego is, the more you'll be able to learn from it and the more you'll be able to refine yourself and grow and gain access to, you know, the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light. So that's what I wanted to discuss in this video. Um, I'm not necessarily saying that my equations and so on are correct, but when I read the works of the Ramchal and I ponder some of the mathematics around things like, you know, the bread of shame and earning our own reward, it just seems to make sense to me, you know, because we're dealing with God. Fundamentally, we're dealing with the concept of infinity. Okay, and with souls, we're dealing with something which is a lot smaller than infinity. And so it makes sense to me why we would have to earn, you know, parts of the Or Ein Sof for ourselves, because otherwise our soul would basically cease to exist. It would be completely nullified in the presence of God. Okay? And so it seems to explain, you know, the concept of reward and punishment and so on. And then when I read about concepts like Bitul Hayesh or self-nullification, the equation of 1 over x, it just makes sense to me. It makes sense to me. And hopefully, you know, me kind of rambling through these things helped make some sense of these concepts for you. Maybe made them a little bit more concrete. Or at least, you know, it's a fun way to look at some concepts in Torah thought, which are considered a bit esoteric and mysterious. So anyway, thank you very much. If you liked this video, my channel has a whole bunch of things on the physics and mathematics of the Bible. I've also got some proofs of Judaism, including a full explanation of the Exodus. And if you want something in written form, my book, Ticket to Heaven, is available on Amazon. Link in description. So, yeah, thank you very much, and God bless.